אני מאוד שמח.
There's room in the front if they want to sit down.
Yeah. למי שרוצים לשבת, יש מקומות בקדימה. איילת, אפשר להתחיל להקליט? היי. כן? Okay, so I'm glad and honored to host with us today Thomas Friedman from the New York Times. I'm going to say a few words about him. For those who don't know him, I'm sure everybody knows him. That's why you're here. We're going to have a conversation rather than a talk. Tom is going to speak later today in the president's house.
Yeah.
In Jerusalem. So he has enough talks to give. I'm gonna pose a few questions to him in a minute. So Thomas Friedman is an internationally renowned author, reporter, and columnist. He is the recipient of 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 for international reporting from the Middle East, and the 3rd for his columns written about 9/11. He is the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, From Beirut to Jerusalem, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, Longitudes and Attitudes, The World is Flat, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, That Used to Be Us, and most recently, Thank You for Being Late. Friedman was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota on July 20th. This is important information. 1991.
1953. Thank you.
1953, and grew up in the middle class Minneapolis suburb of St. Louis Park. So I think he is very renowned, as you all know. I'm not going to read everything about him.
That's enough.
Forgive me for that, because when I use the time for the questions, I'm sure he will be very interesting on the topics we're going to pose to him. And I'm sure we'll give the audience some chance to pose a question or two later on.
Absolutely.
I hope it will be interesting for you as Israeli audience, of course, to hear Tom about issues related to our current reality. But it's not going to be only about our current reality. We are usually provisional and very, Israeli-centric. But we will open up as you expert on world politics, American politics, media, and so on. I hope to be able to cover a few topics. I just came from 2 things. One, a ceremony. I'm not going to mention it. Very important ceremony. But before that, I took part in a conference on constitution making and democratic backsliding. And I want to pose a question to you. Is the American democracy safe?
What's your next question in there? It's yeah, there is no, first of all, thank you very much, Amal, for inviting me. This is all because Amal just came out of the blue and sent me an email and said, would you come and do a talk? And I said, of course I would. And it's great to be here. I have a special connection to Tel Aviv University because in 1968, over Christmas break, when I was a sophomore in high school, my sister was on the first junior year abroad program at Tel Aviv University. So I came to visit her with my family in 1968. It was the first time I was on an airplane, and it was the first time I was out of the state of Minnesota, except to go to summer camp in Wisconsin. And so I went from Minnesota to Tel Aviv University. And so I'm very proud to accept the honorary doctorate now. It sort of closes the circle. So thank you for having me. My country is facing the greatest democratic challenges ever faced. And I wrote about this recently because obviously I've been covering the events here as well. That the 2 countries I, probably follow the most and care most deeply about, I feel are in the same predicament right now, and that I fear we are entering what I call a post-America world and a post-Israel world. Now, the term post-America is a play on a book that Fareed Zakaria wrote 15 years ago. It was called The Post-American World. And what he meant by that was that because of changes in relative power balances in the world, America would no longer be so dominant because of the rise of India and Brazil and other developing world countries. So he called that the post-American world. It wouldn't be as dominant. My fear is we're in the post-America world and the post-Israel world, because America and Israel actually had two fundamental things in common: a deep commitment to the rule of law and a universal mission that was something larger than just your normal nation state, to do tikkun olam in the world when and where possible. And I feel both those identities are now under assault. And that I did a column yesterday, whenever it was. I actually arrived in Israel Sunday night, and as soon as I got here, my editor wrote me and said, Joe Biden was just diagnosed with prostate cancer. And would you write something? Because you know him. And one of the things that when you're a columnist, and because I've been doing this since 1995, a lot of times the way I work actually is I just open my computer and there's like an avatar over my shoulder, and the avatar is saying, I wonder what he's going to write, because I have no idea. And I just literally put my fingers on the keyboard and I see what comes up. And sometimes I even look at it and say, wow, wow, that's really interesting. I should, let me do more of this, you know? And so literally it was like 1 a.m. I thought, oh, I've just been traveling for 12 hours. I got to write a Biden column now. And what came up was happened that 2 weeks ago, I was home, I was having dinner with my family in downtown DC, and my cell phone rang, and it was Joe Biden. And he said, Tom, I'd like to talk to you. I said, well, I'm in a restaurant with my family. Let me walk outside. And I walked outside, and he told me that he was writing a speech. He wanted to write a speech about the American abandonment of NATO by the Trump administration and how important NATO was and the whole Atlantic Alliance. And we talked for 5 minutes. He said, would you want to just brainstorm about this? And I said, absolutely. And I got back to the table, and my wife and daughter said, well, what did he say? I said, Joe Biden, in his weakened voice, in his weakened condition, in his semi-confused, way of speaking, has more gut understanding of America's role in the world than the entire fucking Trump administration put together. Okay. And so that was what my gut reaction. And that was the column I wrote, and so that's what I fear. I fear that we're seeing things I've never seen before. And because they come in just an incredible fire hose, it's you react here, and he's attacking Bruce Springsteen today, and he's attacking habeas corpus tomorrow. And so it's such a rapid fire thing. It's extremely disorienting. And I was talking to a couple of your colleagues here, and it's just really hard to appreciate how broad this is. But what gives me some hope, which is, the strength of the democracy movement in Israel is you're such a small country, and that it can be really intense and immediate. And 6 months and more of democracy protests, and that's amazing. But and we're a much bigger country, and so you can't get that kind of intense immediacy. A 1 million person march in Washington is still tiny in America, But I would tell you, the resistance is happening. The pushback is there. It's mostly in the courts, and I am not at all giving up. In fact, I was very disappointed we ran an article by 3 history professors. One of them was Timothy Snyder. This was just last week. 3 who they said they're moving to Canada. And I was shocked by that. And so actually someone wrote me, a good friend, are you moving? And I said, no, I'm not moving. I'm staying, I'm fighting, and I'm not tired. And so that's been my feeling from the very beginning. This is the fight of my life here and in America. And frankly, in the Arab world, where I care deeply, especially about what's going on in Lebanon. I think we're in for the fight of our lives. This is what I came for. It's why I went into journalism. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not tired.
Well, thank you.
Very much.
Having compared somehow between Israel and the U.S., can you give us your take on the last or recent developments in Israeli-American relations, and how do you read them? Is there something fundamental changing? What's going on actually? Because we can't read the signals coming up from the administration, sometimes very pro-Israeli, sometimes, ignoring Israel completely and making, decisions, taking steps that are crucial to the national security of Israel, but without consulting with the Israeli government and talking to people here. How do you take?
So it's very hard for me to answer that question because I went from having a lot of sources in the Biden administration to having zero sources in the Trump administration. Not even one. Not one. Okay.
Right.
So I have never spoken to a single person in this administration and never been spoken to by a single person in this administration. So anything I tell you is because I'm just reading the tea leaves in front of me. And the good thing about Donald Trump is that he's ready to break all the China. He is a completely transactional person who is ready not to be restrained by any convention or predecessor or rules or laws. But he is really ready to try radical things. And in this part of the world, that can be a really good thing, to cut through encrusted things. The meta point you have to understand about Trump 2 versus Trump 1 is that Trump 1 was surrounded by buffers. Trump 2 is surrounded by amplifiers. Everything else is commentary. So in Trump 1, Trump would come from the Mar-a-Lago bar to the White House, his office, Oval Office, and say to Pompeo, Kelly, Mattis, I got an idea. We're going to turn Gaza into a Club Med. Somebody suggested that at the Mar-a-Lago bar last night, and I thought hey, yeah, that's a good idea, And Pompeo and Kelly and them would say, it's a great boss, that's an amazing idea. Let's do a study on it. I'm going to get my team on it. We'll work on it and we'll do a study on it. And hey, and nice weather we're having, right now, okay? And it would be deflected. Now it goes from the Mar-a-Lago bar directly to the Oval Office, directly to you, with no buffering at all. And again, it can be, in some respects, really opening up of possibilities. And in other ways, it can be just incredibly flat out crazy. So I actually spend a lot of time in China. I've been to China twice now in the last 5 months. And what I worry about in the Middle East, this behavior, again, it's got some real possibilities, and I'll talk about that in a second. The downside is that it's very interesting to watch this from Beijing, because the Chinese say, first of all, they watched the interview, the dialogue between Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukraine president. And the first thing the Chinese say is, oh, we're not going there. Never going to happen to us. If you think our leader, Xi Jinping, is going to sit in the Oval Office and get ambushed like that, not going to happen. And the second thing they say is, let's see, Trump, in his first administration, renegotiated the NAFTA agreement with America's two closest allies, Mexico and Canada. And then Trump 2 tore up that agreement. So what even is the value of an agreement with him? And so they think it's like cute. Oh, it's the art of the deal. Yes, first you put 140% tariffs on, then you lower it to 30. Isn't he cute? Isn't he smart? But to people outside, it's like, wait a minute, this is really unstable. I don't know where anything stands. That's one problem. Another problem is that he's negotiating with Iran now. And I'm looking at who's actually doing the negotiating. Steve Witkoff. I've never met Mr. Witkoff. People say he's actually a very decent and intelligent guy, but he's in the hotel business in Florida. Okay. And the mullahs in Tehran are not in the hotel business in Florida. Okay. And I'm saying to myself, well, who negotiated with the Iranians under Obama? Let's see, it was Bill Burns, Jake Sullivan, and most importantly, people forget, it was a three-man team, Ernie Moniz. Ernie Moniz was Secretary of Energy. He's a nuclear physicist from MIT. Does Witkoff have a nuclear physicist on his team? Because like when you're negotiating with the Iranians about their nuclear program, I'd kind of like there to be a nuclear physicist at the table, not just a hotelier from Palm Beach. And so I think the real concern I have, and the real concern Israel should have about that negotiation is it's what I call, I have a rule about the Middle East. All important politics happens bad bukra, the morning after the morning after. Who's doing the detailed work, for the morning after the morning after? And that's what I don't see. So Trump loves the headlines. I sold $1 trillion of whatever to somebody, but who's doing the contracts? What do they actually say? I'm very worried about that kind of thing. The upside is Ahmed Shara. I happen to believe that I was critical of Israel kind of not taking advantage of the change in power in Syria, because I think it was very important. And Trump just comes in, bring the guy to Riyadh, talk to him, end of sanctions, let's see what you got. I really like that. I really appreciate that. Because this goes back, I have history on this issue, is that back in 1991, I was part of a small group that opposed NATO expansion. And the group was Bill Perry, the Secretary of Defense, Sam Nunn, Bill Bradley, and George Kennan, who I interviewed back then. And we opposed NATO expansion for a very simple reason, that we dreamt one day there might be a democratic Russia. And we didn't know whether Yeltsin or post-Gorbachev, where it would come about, but could we just wait 2 years before we expand NATO into their face, and maybe see if something comes up? And I feel the same about what's going on in Syria. I know Shara's biography. I have plenty of concerns and suspicions, but this is what Israel dreamed of. A possibly democratic, pluralistic Syria. Chance is still low, but maybe give it a week or two before you bomb every site in Syria. I'm sure there are reasons and legitimate targets there, whatever, but the structural problem I have with this moment is that Bibi Netanyahu actually set in motion events in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran that have unlocked the region. And if you ask me what's my biggest criticism today, is that Bibi Netanyahu is trading peace with Saudi Arabia for peace with Smotrich. That's a really bad trade. I don't know if all of this is possible, but I will tell you, Israel has the best chance. Let me just completely fantasize. If Bibi Netanyahu said tomorrow, I am going to begin negotiations on a long-term process to a Palestinian state with the Palestinian Authority, if it gets reformed and produces a new leader, I guarantee you, you would have the possibility of Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, not to mention Saudi Arabia, all joining the Abraham Accords. We're in a completely new structure here. The Lebanese government, I happen to know the prime minister is my oldest friend from Lebanon, is a dream team that we haven't had since 1975. This was set in motion by the crushing of Hezbollah and by the basically weakening of Iran, which Netanyahu did. And I think the great tragedy of the moment is he's politically incapable of harvesting the incredible transformative politics he set in motion. And that's my critique. It's not that you surrender everything, that you forget, you do it with concern and you do it with care and you do it carefully. But this is a transformative moment. These moments don't come along very often. And he is trading peace with Saudi Arabia for peace with Smotrich. That's a bad trade.
Well, in this regard, I would like to ask you, President Trump came to Saudi Arabia, came to United Arab Emirates, came to Qatar, and did not come to Israel. How do you read this? I mean, I was stunned by the fact that he's going there. Now, I know that the United States has much interest in there, and he achieved actually the deals he wanted to achieve. But still, when you look at regional transformations, nothing could happen without taking into consideration that Israel is a regional power, has its own interests, and could be a spoiler actually vis-a-vis American interests in the region. Now, not visiting Israel is a hint. Is how do you read it? How should we understand this? And shouldn't he have included Israel? Could have he done it?
So, again, I go back to, I have no sources at all. I couldn't, by the way, sources are useless in administration. I mean, you go see Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio doesn't know what he's going to do. You know what I mean? And it's actually embarrassing, like, to go see him. What do you think he's going to do? I don't know what he's going to do. This is a one-man show and it's all on impulse. So whatever impulse motivated him to not want to come to Israel now, he's transactional and he wanted to have a headline out of this deal. Trump signs $10 trillion worth of deals here, here, and here. And he didn't want to come here probably to get into the muck of Israeli politics, hostages, Gaza, or whatever. It's a bad look, is my guess, that it could have been something as small as that. But I just don't know.
Well, you have institutions in the U.S. I mean,
we had institutions,
you think which means institutions don't function in the U.S. anymore? I mean, you have a constitution, you have institutions, you have a long tradition of strategic thinking. You have think tanks. You think this is all over? One person can change the entire country? I mean,
so the
U.S. is much deeper than being such a target for such a person, although he's the president.
Our institutions are under assault. We at the New York Times, our editor asked all the columnists at the end of 100 days, the first 100 days of Trump, to all write a column on what you think was the most important thing that happened in the first 100 days of Trump. And I wrote a small piece that said, I think the most important thing that happened in the first 100 days is that Donald Trump fired the head of the National Security Agency, our 8,200, only 1,000 times bigger. He fired the head of the NSA and his deputy. These are the two leading cyber warriors in the United States, because basically a political witch doctor named Laura Loomer, who is a anti-Muslim fanatic, came into the Oval Office and told him these people need to be fired because they were hired by the previous chief of staff and they're not loyal to you. We fired the head of our NSA and his deputy. Let me repeat this, because a witch doctor or equivalent came into the Oval Office and told the president to do that. She is the one also responsible for getting him to fire the head of the National Security Council, Mike Waltz. That's some crazy stuff. That is if that doesn't make you worried, that it would be the equivalent of, some extreme right-wing rabbi coming to Netanyahu and saying, you need to fire the head of the Shin Bet. Oh, wait a minute, he did that. No, it's that's where we have parallels here, but this is even worse because we did not have an ongoing war. So when you see things like that, it's very unnerving to me about where our institutions stand. And again, everyone has been put in place to be amplifiers, not buffers. So our attorney general is not like your attorney general. The only thing they have in common is their gender. Okay, that stops there. Our Attorney General was the first person to issue a ruling saying the countries want to give you a $400 billion 747. No problem. No problem. What happened to that institution? You know? And so our institutions are under assault.
Including the judiciary?
Oh, and very much including the judiciary, but they are fighting back because they still have a lot of independence, and half of them were appointed, more than half maybe, by Democrats. So, but even the Trump judges have not been caving in. So we are now, like Israel, we're both really depending on the judiciary to hold the line, and the press. I mean, he's going after some press, but hasn't come after us, you know, this week. But terrible things are happening. I mean, yesterday, you I'm sure familiar with the TV show 60 Minutes, and the head of CBS News quit last night because Trump has sued CBS News for $20 billion because of an interview they did with Kamala Harris, which he claims was biased, you know. So it's a direct assault on the media. I am so blessed that I work for an amazing newspaper and an amazing family. You know, I've been the principal person at the New York Times writing about the most neuralgic issue for the New York Times, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for since 1979. I was hired by Punch Sulzberger, the publisher. I was made a columnist by his son, Arthur Sulzberger, and I now work for his grandson. And in over 4 decades of writing about this issue for the New York Times, to this day, I have no idea what the Sulzbergers think of my coverage, because they have never once, not one time in 3 generations, ever said a single word to me about what I've written on this subject. And that's pretty amazing. And so I'm really privileged to have that kind of institution at my back.
What about other U.S. media? I mean, you have
We've
BBC,
seen,
CBS,
yeah,
NBC.
no, we see what's happened at the
MSNBC,
Washington Post.
yeah,
You know,
Washington
it's a
Post and so on.
it's a real problem. I mean, but I will say this: the Washington Post, what Jeff Bezos did, you know, around not endorsing Trump, the way he chose not to do it, I thought was really, not endorsing Kamala Harris was bad. But the Washington Post has actually been great in terms of reporting on this administration. It's been excellent. The Wall Street Journal has been amazing. Despite Murdoch owning it, the news pages and even the editorial pages have been very, very strong. So the print media that has survived in America is, I think, really doing its job and doing it well. You know, I do believe that Trump is headed for a really difficult period now after these 100 days, because what he's doing on tariffs, I think, is just a gigantic. It's just wrong. It's going to fail, and it's going to really start to hit the market. And the one disciplining force that he can't control is the market. And you even see him telling Walmart not to raise prices, telling Apple where not to make phones. That's some crazy stuff, you know. And that tells you the market is got his number, and that's something that really will rattle his base. And so I think he's had his best 100 days. I think the next 100 days are going to be incredibly complicated.
Wow. Okay, let me move to something else. For a minute, I'll come back to Israel-American relations, of course, but I would like to go into the American Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we look at, you know, historically, the bond between American Jews and Israel has been for a long time really strong.
Mm-hmm.
The American community has been very supportive of Israel, and still, definitely after October 7th. But we had, you know, very critical voices in the last decade and so.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what are the main developments as you see them in the Jewish community vis-a-vis Israel, if there are any, you know, trends that you mark or see that may have also future ramifications in your view?
Yeah, it's something, that's a subject I'm really not very good at, because it's not something I cover or particularly follow. I don't really, to be honest, like let a lot of people in my office, like who are lobbying, one way or another. And I would confess something to you, it's well known in the New York Times. I've never looked at Twitter. I've never looked at Facebook. I've never looked at Instagram. I've never looked at TikTok, and I've never smoked a cigarette. And my plan is to die saying all five. So I'm completely, and because I consume no social media, everyone in my world likes me. Okay. So it's a joke, but my point is I didn't come here and say, did you see that tweet about me by that Jewish organization? What? I'm just completely oblivious to it. Now, I use Twitter as a broadcast platform, but my secretary does it, and I don't even know the password, and I don't want to know the password. Now, but am I not interested in feedback? Oh, I am. I'll usually have 1,500 comments on an average column. I read them all. Very interesting. And by the way, just so you know, if you have 1,500 comments on your column, a lot of them will be, the typical sort of right left. 5 of them will be flat out brilliant. There's real wisdom in crowds, but you have to find it. But there's real wisdom in crowds. So I just don't interact like with any of the fans in the stands, not on the Palestinian side, not on the Israeli side. I've never been to Columbia University. I've never been, to Harvard Yard. I'm really focused on the region and what's happening here on the ground and sort of come what may. But I will tell you this. So I just did a column last week, on saying that this Israeli government is not an American ally. And it got a lot of circulation in the States. And this happens all the time. And even when here people ask me, boy, you must really be taking a lot of heat. I'm taking no heat whatsoever. The only thing that struck me about that column was Piers Morgan, who's extremely conservative, tweeted it out. And you know who else tweeted it out? Steve Bannon. If I were Bibi Netanyahu, I would take note of that.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think that I think there is a real sense, and I know Yair Golan got in a little trouble for something he said the other day. I wouldn't even begin to speculate in a war what the right number of children are to die in a war. But I'll tell you what the wrong number is. 18,000. That's the wrong number. And that number has gotten through to a lot of people, not just in the left, but to the center and the right. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you.
am I in trouble yet? I mean,
No,
just let me
no,
know,
no.
just
So I'll
because I'll keep going if you need.
here. Which means, are you telling us that Israel has lost its charm in the White House?
I would never say anything like that, because with Trump, with Trump, it's a one-man show, and it depends on what side of the bed he woke up on. I'm not being cute or facetious. I just have no idea what goes through his mind, who he's talking to. He's motivated by transactional power that will either deliver him money, power for America, or a Nobel Prize. And so he toggles between those 3 things. And if one day he decides that Bibi is the road to a Nobel Prize, he'll be Bibi's best friend. So there's no sort of core grounding there, that you would say, you could have said about Biden or George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush, and so I just don't know. I have no sources, and I'm watching just like you are.
To that extent.
Yeah.
Now in this regard, I mean, how do you, I mean, still you have a lot of experience. You've covered the Arab world for a long time. How do you read what's going on in the minds of the Saudis?
Yeah.
Regarding Israel, regarding the region?
Yeah, this is really interesting, question, and it requires some background. And so I'll start at the very beginning. So I went to graduate school in England, went to Oxford. I got a degree in Arabic and Middle East Studies. I got hired on Fleet Street in London in 1978 by UPI, United Press International. You'll understand why I'm telling you the story in a second. And I was there for 9 months, and the #2 man in the Beirut bureau got shot in the ear by a man robbing a jewelry store on Hamra Street. And he said, I want to go home. I want to get out of here. I do not want to pass go. I do not want to collect $200. Get me home. And they came to me and said, how would you like to go to Beirut? Your predecessor was just shot. And I said, that's what I came for. So they sent me to Beirut in 1979. The first two stories I covered, first two big stories I covered, on a typewriter, by the way. Typewriter was a device, if you pressed a key, it created pressure on a roller. We wrote our, by the way, we wrote our stories then. The way you had to write your story was you had to write them 3 paragraphs at a time on a typewriter, and then hand those 3 paragraphs to a telex operator who punched them into telex tape, and that sent that to New York. Try covering the bombing of the American embassy on a typewriter with no move graph, no spell check, writing 3 paragraphs at a time. It's a great discipline, I can tell you. The first 2 stories I covered, though, were the Iranian Revolution and the takeover of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. It was 1979. And now everyone knows about the Iranian Revolution. What is less known by people is the takeover of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, which happened to have been a much more important and seminal event. Just to remind you, what happened was that in Saudi Arabia, in the Kaaba in Mecca, people bring coffins, often of the deceased, and they circumambulate the Kaaba with coffins. On this day, back in 1979, a group of jihadis, radical, puritanical fundamentalists, came with coffins, only they were filled with RPGs and AK-47s. They opened them up, they took over the mosque, and they went into the minarets and broadcast for 30 days that the ruling Al Saud family are drunkards, prostitute chasers, and gamblers. Let me give you the equivalent of that. Radical Christian monks take over the Vatican, go up into the turrets, and for 30 days broadcast that the Pope is a drunkard, prostitute chaser, and a gambler. Pretty big event. It was, for the Muslim world and for Saudi Arabia, a seminal event. And they finally got them out with the help of the French Foreign Legion. And after 30 days, I believe it was, and I'm trying to cover this from Beirut using Kuwaiti newspapers. No one could get into to Riyadh. It was very difficult. And after 30 days, Al Saud said, that's not going to happen again. And to protect themselves from that ever happening again, they took Saudi Arabia on a giant, massive, fundamentalist right turn. And they changed the entire face of the Arab Muslim world, from Morocco to the Finsbury Mosque to Indonesia. It was a seminal event, and the whole process ended and climaxed on 9/11. But it started in 1979. Before 1979, there were women broadcasters on Saudi TV. There were women airline attendants on Saudi Airlines. That all changed after 1979. And it affected here too, in the Arab Muslim community in Israel. Comes 2016, I get a call from a leading Arab TV station director in the Gulf, and he says, there's a new Saudi crown prince. His name's Mohammed bin Salman, and he'd like to meet you. Would you interview him? He said, sure. And then he called back the next day and said, will you be nice? And I said, I'm always nice. I mean, I can beat him on here. I don't need to come there to beat him up, So I went to Saudi Arabia, and I did the first interview with MBS. First sort of Western interview in depth. And it was immediately obvious to me what he was doing. And I wrote this, and he made it part of his own sort of self-description. He was reversing 1979. That's what he's there for, to reverse this fundamental change that began in 1979. Started with letting women drive, and now it's gone right through the whole society. This is a tectonic event for this region. And it's now affected the whole Gulf. It's now, again, thanks to what Israel did militarily in weakening Hezbollah and Iran, it's now really manifesting itself in places like Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. And so we're in a gigantic structural change of the Middle East, of the politics of this region. So let me just say one more thing about this. You know, when people ask me, what's the biggest story that happened in your career? What's the most important story? I never hesitate to tell them. I think the biggest thing that happened in my career, most important thing, was the creation of the European Union. Now, Americans will do anything for the EU except read about it, okay? I happen to believe that a continent known for religious, tribal, and sectarian wars since time immemorial puts down those swords and creates the biggest center of free markets, free people, the rule of law, and human rights in the heart of Europe, a region where 1 million of my brothers and sisters had to fight 3 wars in the last century, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. That's a pretty big deal. And I happen to believe the EU is mankind's single greatest creation. What MBS is trying to do is create an EU of the Middle East with Saudi Arabia as Germany, the UAE maybe as France, or maybe even Iran, and he wants Israel to be very much part of it. That's the vision. And that's what's on the table here. And again, I'm not in Israeli politics, but if I were trying to frame this opportunity for Israel, and what Biden was trying to do was to try to connect India, this IMEC corridor, with this new EU-led Middle East, with Israel up through Europe, tied in with energy, trade, rail travel. There's a real vision out there that I think is just a great opportunity for Israel. Is it easy as a slam dunk? Are there a million issues? Do the Palestinians need to get their absolute act together? They don't have it together, not just Hamas, but with the Palestinian Authority? Absolutely. But the world is really changing around you. And I think the tragedy is just when this is happening, tragedy for me, is Israel as a government that is going completely in the opposite direction of where this whole region is going, and where I think the whole world, needs to go in the age we're about to enter. So let me just say a couple words about that, because I'm working on a new book now about AI, and it's related to this. So if you ask me, the book I'm working on with my friend Craig Mundy, who was Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft, we basically divide the world up, the history of the world. This is for purely heuristic, explanatory reasons, into 3-phase changes. So the first phase is from the creation of the spawning of human beings, we crawl out of the oceans, right up to the printing press. We call it the age of ice. So we use water molecules as proxies for humans. And ice, and a phase change happens when matter is exposed to changes in heat. The heat for us are new technologies. So we have this first phase change, we call it ice, because in ice, water molecules move very slowly and they're very separated. That's why it's ice. Comes the printing press, we get a phase change. The ice melts and we enter the water phase. So we go from vertical systems to water. What do we know about water? That's when people and ideas and capital start to flow. Water phase lasts right until a couple of years ago. I would say 2017 with the transformer algorithm. And we're about to enter, because we get more technology, more heat, the water starts to boil into a vapor. Now, what do we know about water? We know about water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. I checked the temperature of technology on my way over here. The thermometer reads 211.9. We are sitting on the edge of the most transformative phase change for human civilization ever. We are about to become godlike as a species. We're about to birth a superintelligence greater than the intelligence that the Creator endowed us with. The thing about phase changes, also why I find them a useful metaphor, is that ice looks just like ice until the temperature hits 32.1 degrees Fahrenheit, and it becomes water. And it becomes something completely different with completely different properties. and you cannot predict at all how they're going to behave. You know, we had a cartoon. I'm aging myself. I'm dating myself. I'm 71. I grew up on a cartoon called The Jetsons. As some of you out there, I'm sure, saw The Jetsons. Story about this family. It lived in the future. Father George Jetson and his wife and 2 kids. The Jetsons was actually written in 1962, and it was about the world in 2062. So the writers could imagine anything, anything. George Jetson, the star of the show, the father, flew his own flying saucer. In other words, the writers that show could not imagine self-driving cars. They couldn't imagine a self-driving flying saucer. And he also had a photo phone, but it was fixed to the wall. Okay. So you cannot imagine what is about to happen. But the reason we use vapor as a metaphor is because AI is going into everything. It's going into your car, your phone, your toaster, your hip replacement, your pacemaker. It's going into everything. And when it does, it's going to change everything about everything in ways that we can't possibly predict. And the temperature is 211.9. It's just about to happen. So with all due respect to what's like going on with the settlements or whatever, there's actually a big thing happening in the world outside of that, and outside of, you know, Bibi's relationship with his cabinet. And it's like maybe the biggest thing. It is going to be the biggest thing, I believe, that humans have generated in this experience. We're going to become godlike. And so to take advantage of this moment is going to require, no one country in the world can do this alone. You need to be part of coalitions. We need to be part of a coalition to govern this. We need to be a part of coalitions to take advantage of it. And that is going to require us, I believe, to detribalize more than any time in the history of human beings in order to collaborate. Can we do that? Odds don't look good, you know, to me. But if we don't, what's going to happen is we're not going to be able to take advantage of an incredible technology that can actually solve the climate crisis, can solve the clean energy crisis, can cure cancer. And so collaboration now is going to become so much more important. Israel is hardwired to take advantage of this era. I mean, it has the brain power, it has the technology prowess, it's hardwired, and it's in the middle of this whole region. And so my wish is just people would sort of get out of there, just this narrow alley, you know, and see where the world is going now, combining it with what I'm saying, the trends in the Gulf and this trend. I was just in China for the China Development Forum in Beijing a few weeks ago, and it's their big sort of Davos, but it's much smaller actually. And they asked me to attend a meeting of economists when I was there, and so I said I would, but I actually began my talk at this meeting because they asked me to say a few words. I began by saying, my name is Thomas Friedman, not Milton Friedman. Okay, so I don't even know what I'm doing here. Okay, I'm just a reporter, but I want to share with you a dream I had last night. I dreamt it was 2030. It was the year 2030, and all that America could sell China was soybeans. And all that China could sell America was soy sauce. Why is that? Because when AI as a vapor goes into everything, everything becomes TikTok. That is, look at the fight we're having in America over, should we keep TikTok, not keep TikTok? What it's about is that, wait a minute, this thing, it's got AI in it. It can, who controls the algorithm? Who controls the data? Where does it go? It goes to China. How can we trust it? Well, what happens when that same thing is your Chinese-made car, your battery, your toaster, your refrigerator, your watch, your pacemaker? If we don't have a shared trust framework for using AI, all we're going to be able to sell each other are soybeans and soy sauce. So we think we're in a trade war. We're really on the verge of a giant trust war. And that's really what I'm focused on and writing about. Sorry, so far away from
the way you imagine, no, but the way you draw the picture of the world counters actually human history. I mean, you came from China. China is putting all energy possible in order actually to take lead of the world and leave America behind. And the Americans are investing a lot in order to block China from achieving this goal. So this fight between these giants is not gonna get over because of AI. It's gonna be a tool in order to actually control the world. And many already speak about the next century as the Chinese century rather than the
Yeah.
American century. So coming from there, how do they see it?
So it's
And,
a good question. A couple of questions there. And I used this in talk I gave in Beijing. Whatever Donald Trump and Xi Jinping think they're going to be judged on, I would say also Bibi Netanyahu, leaders of the Arab world, they're just going to be judged on one thing: how they manage the transition to AI when the temperature hits 212 degrees. You may think they're going to be judged on settlement, this peace. No, this is going to dwarf every issue. And you are absolutely right. That the idea that we would detribalize ourselves, is so hardwired into us so quickly. I would certainly not predict it or bet on it, but I'm just here to tell you, if we don't do it, we're not going to be able to take advantage of not only the greatest invention humans have ever made, but maybe the last, because everything else will be invented by that. Have a nice day.
1 second. Last question before I open the floor for the audience to pose questions. You spoke about pushbacks in the US. I'm very concerned about what's going on in the US. As you see, I'm very concerned about what's going on with the universities there.
Yeah.
Can you say something about them? Will they be able to face this invasion of the administration into their own guts?
Yeah. It's a real, again, I'm not sort of up on that.
But you live there.
I live there.
experience
Yeah. I mean, I don't hang out a lot at universities, so I don't know. There's a lot of pushback going on. I think united we stand, divided we fall. So I hope that people will come together. Law firms that have been under the same kind of assault have now been pushing back. Harvard is pushing back. It's got the resources to do it. But all of this is just sort of flat out crazy when you put it in, again, in the context which you did of U.S. China cooperation. Of competition. Because basically, the reason I've been opposed to Trump's tariff war is because what Trump is basically doing is putting up tariffs to foreign competition, and to create a wall. You normally put that wall up in order to give your own companies a chance to grow and compete better. He's basically putting up a wall to foreign competition and then shooting some of our best companies in the head behind the wall. Okay. So I just give you an example. Ford Motor, Ford Motor sells 40% of their cars outside the United States. So they compete with Chinese electric vehicles globally. And Trump is about to, the Republicans in Congress, remove all the incentives for electric vehicles. And this comes, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And that's sort of what's going on, because we're basically at a moment now, and Israel's well, I think, positioned to take advantage of this moment, where we're shifting what is the ecosystem for innovation and growth. So we're going from an ecosystem that was basically combustion engines, oil, coal, steel, fossil fuel energy, to an ecosystem that's all about EVs, batteries, electrification of everything, robots, autonomous vehicles, and AI. That's the new ecosystem that you've got to be a part of. And Israel's really, I think, doing a lot to try to be part of that ecosystem. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are doing the same thing. Trump, on the one hand, he goes to Saudi Arabia and does his deal, over data centers, but then he comes home and he is what I call completely right-wing woke. What is right-wing woke? Oh, EVs? We don't do EVs. EVs are for sissies. Real men don't do EVs. Okay. So that's like crazy. So that is making China's day. If you ever, the most important algorithm probably ever written was the transformer algorithm that actually created the basis for ChatGPT and the LLMs. I did a column about this last year. It was written by 8 Google researchers. Not a single one was born in America. Okay. And we're basically going into this world of where these things of AI, and we have a president basically saying to everybody, get the hell off my lawn. So none of this makes sense. it's going to end badly. And I couldn't be more concerned about where we are, because you can like China, not like China, but whatever I would say about China, I will tell you this: these are serious people, and they're not playing right-wing woke, which is that we don't do green power, we don't do clean tech, and it's going to pull a whole part of that ecosystem out of it, and we're not going to be able to compete for it. You know, the thing that Trump understands the least, which is a big change that happened in the world. So I was in China for the China Development Forum. I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes. A couple of years ago, just 2 years ago after COVID, and I was met at the airport by an intern from the China Development Forum, just to help me through customs. And so we had time. We were just waiting for my suitcase, and she said to me, she was a college student, and she said, "Mr. Friedman, I have to ask you a question. Is the world still flat?" And I said, actually, it's flatter than ever in the way I meant it, which is that more people can compete, connect, and collaborate on more things in more ways on more days for less money from more places than ever before. It's actually flatter than ever. I could tell she didn't quite believe that, you know. She was, then about 10 minutes later, she does, "Mr. Friedman, I used ChatGPT last weekend." I said, "You use ChatGPT on a VPN from Beijing, and you're asking me if the world is flat?" Okay. So this is all really going ahead. And the thing about phase changes is as you get more technology, the phase changes come faster than ever. And Israel has so many things going for it to take advantage of this new era, but it's got to overcome this conflict. And just to make sure I have annoyed everybody, I will end by the fact, as you know, reading my column, that I insist that the only way forward is 2 states for 2 people. And I have written that from the very beginning of this conflict. And people will write me and confront me often and say, "Mr. Friedman, are you delusional?" Okay. To which I usually say, "Oh, you mean that's hard? I didn't know. Thank you very much." Okay. I know it's hard, and we're not going to get there in one leap anymore either. I know that as well. But I'm convinced of one thing, and that is that if we don't have that, we're not going to have 3 states, 1 state. We're going to have no states for 2 people. We're going to have a permanent grinding war. And so even if there is just a 5% chance of this working, I'm going to devote 100% of my energy to that 5%, because I think the alternative is actually going to be nightmarish at exactly the wrong time for this community and this country, both Israelis and Palestinians and the region. And so I'm not at all, you can write whatever you want about me. I'm going to keep being the voice for that, because I understand it's not possible now until the war is over to even talk about it, and the hostages are relieved, and God willing, that happens tomorrow. But one day this war will end. One day we will get back to that conversation. One day I hope these 2 people will find a way to live together in security and peace for both, because this region is so primed to become the EU of the Middle East, to take advantage of this. And I just hope one day Israel will have a government that recognizes that and honors it. I have to go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's a run. I don't really put, I got a point here. Was this 1 o'clock? No, I got. Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you for reminding me. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I got it. 2 o'clock. Let me just check. Let me just check what time it is. Yeah.